Russia is not to be trusted. And we need to be ready to handle all eventualities. And I believe that would call for some sort of military escort. Mr. Putin has determined that this is another tool he can use in his toolkit to try to relieve sanctions and to take the fight back to the West by blockading all of this food. As to what we should be doing about it, I actually am listening to people who are a little better attuned to the problems at sea. And there are several things that are being considered. Reflagging the ships into nations like the United States and others, one of the possibilities. And then developing a NATO escort capability. I mean, we already have that capability, but working with Turkey and the Montreux Convention to get the appropriate ships into the Black Sea to do that escort. And then, frankly, looking maybe to Turkey to lead an escort, as they have a significant naval presence in the Black Sea. So there are options on the table. It's less about what we can do. It's more about, from a policy perspective, we are willing to do.
Yeah, so there are options, but each one of them come with considerable political complications, don't they? So if I look at one or two of those you mentioned, it would be possible then to designate a freighter carrying Ukrainian grain a U.S. ship. You could register it as a U.S. ship, but even then, could it be allowed to leave a port without some sort of military escort?
I think we would need to have an escort. As you have seen on the ground, numerous times, frankly, over and over, Russia has agreed to humanitarian corridors or corridors for the escape of people from towns. You remember the famous several times when people were trying to get out of Mariupol before it was overrun. And the Russians agreed to these corridors, and then they attacked those in the corridors when they came out. And so, I mean, straightforward, Russia is not to be trusted. And we need to be ready to handle all eventualities. And I believe that would call for some sort of military escort.
So if you were then advising policymakers in NATO, the American administration, and your advice being spread around NATO leaders, what would it be? To provide military escorts then for grain carrying freight vessels, and then run the risk of a confrontation and engagement with Russian naval forces, because that would mean inevitably a huge escalation, would it not? Would your advice be to risk that and to do that?
You just labeled that an escalation. I would not label that an escalation. I would call that a due outcome of Russian aggression and Russia causing the problem.
Right.
If anything, the escalation is on the Russian side and not the NATO side.
Yes.
We do not want to allow Russia to turn food into another weapon. And the areas that Ukraine's grain goes to are already areas that have issues and problems. They don't need their problems exacerbated by food shortages.
Yes. So look, putting it very bluntly, General, tell me, is this fair? Your advice would be to call Russia's bluff, that the grain should be allowed to leave Odessa or whatever port it happened to be. It should have a NATO military escort. And if Russia chose to engage those vessels, that's on Russia. In other words, look, if Russia wants to escalate that's on them. These grain supplies are desperately needed. Russia claims not to be threatening grain supplies. So let's just see if they want to back up their promises.
Yeah, I would only change what you said in one way, and that is that I would make this bigger than NATO. Yeah. I think the EU has a call for being there. I think there are other nations outside of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Black Sea region that should be a part of this as well. The navies of the world, one of their primary functions is to keep the sea lanes of commerce free and clear and open, to promote free commerce. And what we have is Russia already in an illegal, immoral war now blocking sea lanes of commerce to add tools to their war chest. And I think it's the navies of the world that should be involved here.
Oh, so your advice then is bold. Do you imagine that political leaders in the West might take that advice, might act on that advice?
Sadly, I don't. I don't want to be too critical, but frankly, most of the West right now is fairly well deterred by Mr. Putin. When he threatens things, it causes us to take decisions that limit our responses. That has been the way in this war all along. We were slow to start resupplying Ukraine because we thought the war would be over quickly. And now we're slow to get Ukraine some of the things that they need the very most.
Yes.
I am very happy and thankful that the United States and the UK have finally taken a policy decision to provide long-range rocket systems. MLRS in the United States, our particular system, HIMARS. I'm glad that we've finally taken that policy decision. But if you look at the numbers of these that the US, and frankly, again, I'm thankful for what UK has done. But if you look at both the US and UK and how many of these systems and how much ammunition they're supplying, it's extremely, extremely small numbers.
Yes.
And will not have an effect on this war for some time. So glad for the policy decision. Now we need to press for a more significant and more impacting contribution by the nations.
Fascinating. You're calling for a much stiffer response. General Philip Breedlove, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. Good to have you on the program. Thank you.